Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff, passed away on Easter Monday at the age of 88 after suffering from a chronic lung disease. Described as a humble leader, the world mourns his loss. Ukraine has a deadline to respond to Trump's proposal to end the war by the end of this week, a plan that experts say favors Russia. The US dollar has dropped to a three-year low amid President Donald Trump's tariff war and his push to oust Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff, has passed away at the age of 88. Yesterday, he stood before thousands in St. Peter's Square, offering his final Easter blessing and wishing the world a happy Easter. Pope Francis was known for his unwavering dedication to the poor and vulnerable. He also drew criticism from some conservatives for his critiques of capitalism and his urgent calls to address climate change. In February 2025, he was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital with bronchitis. In what would be his final message to the world, Pope Francis delivered his Easter address from a wheelchair, while a Vatican archbishop read the traditional blessing on his behalf. He called for freedom of religion and respect for the views of others, stating that peace is not possible without them. Pope Francis addressed the situation in Gaza, condemning the ongoing war and reiterated his call for a ceasefire. He also described the rise in global anti-Semitism as worrisome, and on Ukraine, the pontiff urged all parties to pause efforts aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace.
Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Surrexit Dominus vere.
Preghiamo per le comunità cristiane in Libano e in Siria, che mentre quest'ultimo paese.
Pope Francis, known for his humble lifestyle, requested to be buried in a simple wooden coffin. Reuters' Vatican correspondent Joshua McAlwee has more details.
So Pope Francis was the first pope from the Americas. He was from Argentina, and he was known for choosing a more simple lifestyle, kind of not always enjoying the high pomp and circumstance of the papacy that previous popes have enjoyed. He changed the rites for a papal funeral to simplify them. One of the major changes is that he asked to be buried in a simple wooden casket. Previous popes have been buried in a casket of 3 interlocking coffins of cypress, oak, and lead. Francis asked to be buried only in a simple wooden coffin.
For more on this, I'm joined by Vatican expert Philip Pullella, who is in Rome for us. Philip, great to have you on the show. What is your reaction to the news of the Pope today? Yesterday, he was addressing crowds on Easter Sunday.
Yeah, it was a real shock because as frail as he was, it seemed that after 38 days in the hospital, he'd come out. He had appeared in public several times, however briefly. He seemed determined to send a message that he was getting back to work, that he needed to be with the people, see the people. So it was a total shock this morning when the news was announced by Cardinal Farrow, who is the Camerlingo, or the Chamberlain. he is the person who will now run the day-to-day business of the church until a new pope is elected after a conclave. But we're at the very, very beginning. But it was quite shocking, also in comparison with the death of Pope John Paul II, almost exactly 20 years ago, on April the 2nd of 2005. Now, that was a very, very long, drawn-out death. He was very sick, but also the few days before he actually died, people knew that there was very little time left for him. He was in critical condition in his bedroom in the Apostolic Palace. The light was kept on, so there was a kind of a connection with the people who were in St. Peter's Square. And so it came as a tremendous sadness when John Paul died, but it did not come at all as a surprise, where what happened this morning was complete opposite. It came first as a surprise, and then the sadness started coming to the fore.
In Pope Francis's obituary, you called him a pontiff who shook up the Catholic Church. How did he do this?
Well, he did it in a number of ways. First of all, his primary one of the primary mottos of his pontificate was to look from the peripheries towards the center instead of from the center out towards the peripheries. Now that came that he enacted that in various ways. First of all, his first trips were to places that had been would say second rate. Other people would have considered second rate places. His first trip was to go to Lampedusa, which is an island south of Sicily, which many thousands of migrants have died trying to get to this island. And that was his first trip to underscore his concern for migrants. And then the countries that he visited after that, I think Albania, he went to the far ends of the earth, and he never visited most of the main capitals of Europe, which was the opposite of what some previous popes had done, to sort of go to these centers of Catholicism like Paris and London, other places, Lisbon. He did go to Lisbon later on, but first he went to some places that were really far-flung and had very few Catholics, because he knew that a pope coming all the way to see them was very important to them.
Conservatives were unhappy with the Pope from the start because of his informal style. We know he didn't live in the papal palace. How did he cope with his critics?
Well, he always said that he didn't mind being criticized as long as it was in good faith. As you said from the beginning, conservatives were unhappy with him. They accused him of sowing confusion, particularly on issues such as gay rights, and also because of the traditions that he no longer thought were important, wearing some papal garb, wearing the purple shoes of the fishermen. Those kind of things were not important to him. He did all kinds of things that previous popes did not do. Some of them were small and some of them were not small, but he wanted to be as close to the common person as possible. As you said, he chose not to live in the papal apartments. Now, the papal apartments are not extra luxurious, they are large. And he decided he needed, for his own mental health, which is the way he put it himself, was to live in a community atmosphere, which is why he chose to live in the Casa Santa Marta, which is a modest hotel in the Vatican. There's nothing really luxurious about it. It's equivalent to a 3- or 4-star hotel, but nothing really, really luxurious about it, so that he could feel like a normal person. It was very important to him. And he, at the beginning, at least, he dined in the common dining hall, etc. And he said that he had to do this for his mental health. He once described the papal apartments as a kind of a backward funnel, that you basically go in from the other side, and all of a sudden you have all this space, but you're isolated from the rest of the world. And other things like calling people cold on the phone if he heard that someone was in a difficult situation, someone had lost a parent, someone had lost a child in a tragedy. He would actually make the call himself. He liked to communicate directly and remove layers of the bureaucracy, if you will. I received several calls from him directly after I sent him messages asking for interviews, and he responded by calling me directly rather than going through the many layers of the bureaucracy in the Vatican, which is the way he liked to operate. He did not like people to tell him what to do. He did it himself.
Vatican expert Philip Pullella, thank you so much for joining me and bringing me your insights on the Pope.
You're welcome.
Now, world leaders reacted to the death of Pope Francis, remembering him as a global voice for peace. French President Emmanuel Macron was among the first to pay tribute, calling Pope Francis a man of humility. Meanwhile, the Dutch Prime Minister described him as a man of the people. The European Parliament President highlighted his contagious smile, and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed deep sadness, saying that his teaching and his legacy will not be lost. Like world leaders, citizens across the globe also mourn the death of the Pope.
So many people look to the Pope as the leader of the Christian world, and I think it will be a time of great sadness.
And he was so brave yesterday. And the fact that we saw him on TV with the crowds doing his duty to the very last moment, I respect him so much.
Well, he was trying his very best to do what he has to do in his position as a Pope, and he was doing a very good job. But life is life.
Hours after the announcement of Pope Francis's death, the bells at St. Peter's Basilica rang earlier today, marking his passing. We can now go to international lawyer and church consultant Harry Hagopian. Harry, thank you for joining me. Catholics begin 9 days of mourning. How does the death of the Pope reverberate across the whole world?
Well, there is an element of sadness that is slowly percolating, because I woke up this morning and I was unaware of what had happened, and suddenly I heard on the radio that half an hour earlier the Vatican had announced that he'd passed away. And then I sent a text message to a couple of bishops I work with, and later they called me and they said, "Harry, we were shocked. We didn't know about it until we read your message." And just like them, many people around the world will be very sad for the loss of a man who has been on our television screens, in our homes for so long that there is a familiarity that is there. It's almost like he's part of the family. And I think that is what they will miss. Was it expected or totally unexpected? I slightly disagree with your previous guest. I think that it was quite clear to me that the man was very sick. Nobody knew when he would die, but it felt yesterday when he was giving his message to Rome and the world, and when he then sat in his Pope mobile and went through the crowds, that he was really in pain and unwell. So in a sense, at 88, after 13 years as Pope, I think the man can now rest in eternal peace.
Harry, in his Easter address yesterday, Pope Francis addressed the situation in Gaza. This was a cause very close to his heart. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, I can, Leigh Ann. I actually know the parish priest of the Latin Rite Catholic Church in Gaza. And I met him recently in London, and he said that the Pope just simply picks up his phone, calls, and starts asking, how are things today? Trying to find out if the Christian community, which is an infinitely small community in Gaza, whether they were okay, whether they were doing well, how was the situation on that particular day. And I asked him, I said, Father Gabriel, how often does he call? And he said, guess what, Harry? Almost every day. And I think he got a buzz picking up the phone, overcoming all the formalities and all the bureaucracy, and just talking from one spiritual person to another and doing his pastoral work, which was very much what Francis was all about, and asking about the people in Gaza. And that is something that continued for many, many, many months. In fact, for the duration of the war, that miserable, terrible war in Gaza.
When can we expect the funeral of Pope Francis, and what happens in the run-up to his send-off? I know we've spoken about this before, Harry.
Yeah, well, the way it goes, Leigh Ann, is, of course, there are always a few tweaks here and there. That's what the Vatican is all about. But don't forget that the Vatican is also a very well-oiled machinery, and they were expecting this to happen. So it wasn't that they all woke up this morning and said, oh my God, what are we meant to do now? So the way that the protocol goes is that there will be a period of 9 days of mourning in the Vatican, and then within those 9 days, usually between the 6th and the 9th day, the funeral will take place. And as your previous guest said, it's going to be a simpler burial, a simpler funeral, if he gets his way, because the Vatican has its own opinion as well on these things. So that's what's going to happen. So if you want me to give you a bet, and then you can come back on another day and tell me I didn't get it right, I would suspect that he might actually be buried on Friday or Saturday, in other words, in a few days' time, to give a few days for all the cardinals from all over the world to come. Remember, they all got to come, then the lobbying starts, the communication starts, the conversations start, and then they get ready, to go into the hall to elect a new pope. So I suspect in the next few days we'll hear that. And of course, everybody now will shift from the moment of shock, followed by the moment of sadness, into a moment of who is going to come next. Because as you yourself said, this Pope defined himself or described himself as a pope for the poor people, and he constantly talked about a poor church for the poor. His three most important messages: one was sensitivity to the poor, and that was in one of his 3 encyclicals or letters. The other one is reaching out to other people. And the third one, he liked very much to consider everybody a brother. So as far as the region is concerned, the MENA and Gulf region, let's not forget how involved he was in interfaith work, and how he went to the United Arab Emirates, and how he helped found a center which brought together the 3 monotheistic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So these were the 3 pillars of what Francis really represented to the world, in a very humble, simple way, trying to overcome the bureaucracy. I always used to smile when I would see him on the screen trying to do his thing, and then the Vatican officials would come to try and shift him to this or that, and he would look very unhappy because he wanted to do it his way. Well, it's the end of one journey, but the faith continues, the church continues. So the question now is, what happens next? If, Leigh Ann, you ever watched the Conclave film, I was amused this morning because I've seen it, and I thought a lot of people would now say, this is the Conclave film in real time, panning out in front of the whole world. And remember, there are about 2.5 billion, that's with a B, Catholics and Christians across the world.
Harry Hagopian, thank you so much for joining me, international lawyer and church consultant. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure is mine, Leigh Ann.
And now moving on to Ukraine. US President Donald Trump has expressed hope that Russia and Ukraine will reach a deal this week to end the conflict, suggesting it would have a direct impact on American businesses and the global economy. Trump's social media post came as Putin renewed attacks following the Easter ceasefire. As Trump expects a peace agreement, he also warned that the United States could abandon its mediation efforts if talks remain deadlocked. This puts Kyiv on the clock to respond to Trump's Ukraine peace plan, which includes recognizing Russia's annexation of Crimea and blocking Ukraine from joining NATO. Experts say the proposal favors Russia, despite being described as a bold attempt by the Trump administration to end the war. Following Trump's comment that Ukraine-Russia talks are coming to a head, Putin announced a temporary Easter truce over the weekend. However, Zelensky reported nearly 60 shelling incidents and numerous drone strikes despite the ceasefire. Ukraine's president recorded an Easter message for his people. Take a listen.
We know what we're defending. We know what we are fighting for whom, and for whose sake. And that is why every time, no matter how hard it gets, we still do not lose faith, because this faith is the faith in each other, in those who stand beside you, in Ukrainians. Faith that evil may have its hour, but God will have his day. Dear people, may that day come. May evil's hour end. May the day of life arrive, the day of peace, the day of Ukraine, the day that lasts for centuries, and we will be able to come together again at one table on a peaceful Easter.
For more on this, I'm joined by Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riad Kahwahji. Riad, great to have you on the show. So why did Putin all of a sudden announce this Easter truce, and what actually gave him the authority to do this?
Well, to many people, this looked more like a smokescreen, just to create the illusion that Russia is serious about peace, about the initiative that President Trump is pushing. However, as everybody has watched and witnessed, that there was no real ceasefire. There was continued shelling, bombardment, exchanges between the two sides. So it's about creating the illusion here. It's about, creating perceptions via these announcements that Russia is quite serious about pursuing the peace process.
And do you think the US administration and Donald Trump are buying this smokescreen from Russian President Vladimir Putin because they are pushing so hard for an end to this?
I'm not sure about what they're feeling now, but it must feel a bit tough in a sense that they seem to have had high hopes that Putin would jump to the opportunity of a US president pushing for a peace plan that very much favors the Russian conditions in this conflict. And they have seen very little reaction, if any, from Moscow so far. So it must feel a bit embarrassing here to be in this position, after pushing so hard, pressing Ukraine to accept concessions, to go into certain conditions, and yet the party that has not given a clear response to the peace proposal is Moscow in this case.
So the Trump administration has put forward several proposals to Ukraine. What are they asking the country to agree to? And you mentioned earlier, it appears to be favoring Russia.
Well, according to the reports from the U.S. media in the past 24 hours, they quoting some leaked reports that have said that the U.S. was willing to recognize the annexation of Crimea. And also the U.S. was ready to also put a restriction or a veto on Ukraine ever joining NATO, as part of this peace agreement. So this is pretty much giving the Russians a good deal of what they have demanded. Recognizing the annexation of Ukrainian territory, as we all know, was something completely rejected by the previous U.S. administration, by all of the European capitals. So now we have an administration that is openly, or according to U.S. media, has already informed the Russian side that it's willing to go along with these steps, but still, until now, there is no response from the Russians, as if the Russians are saying, no, we want more than this.
So what's interesting is I've spoken to many Ukrainian MPs on the show myself, and they say they want to be part of NATO. A red line for them is not joining NATO. This is something really important for the Ukrainian people, and they say for their long-term safety and security in the country. So right now we're here with these proposals. So Riad, do you think that a peace deal is achievable this week or anytime soon?
Well, it is. There's always a possibility. I mean, we are not the ones who are under pressure. We are just here analyzing what we're seeing. But based on the position of the Ukrainians, they seem to, until now, that they are too far apart between their expectations and what the U.S. appears now to be willing to give the Russians. So are the Ukrainians okay with what has been leaked, according to the reports from the Western media, that Ukraine has already been informed, as well as some other European capitals have already been made aware of the U.S. Position. So we'll have to wait and see if Ukraine really feels that it has to go for this peace agreement. It has no option. So it's pretty much up to the two parties of the conflict. If the two sides believe that this is the best they could get, taking into consideration all the conditions around them, then we could see things that were not acceptable before to be acceptable at the moment. So it's all down to the two parties of the conflict, Ukraine and Russia. They are the ones who at the end will determine what would be in their best interest and to go for it right now.
Riad Kahwahji, Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst. Always great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US president's crackdown on campuses continues, with reports suggesting that Trump is threatening to cut another $1 billion in funding for Harvard University, specifically targeting health research. This comes as tensions between the Trump administration and elite schools escalates. The administration has already withheld government funding from Harvard, Columbia, and other universities over pro-Palestinian protests on campuses in response to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Now, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been linked to a second group chat about sensitive military operations. The messages sent via the Signal messaging app are again understood to have contained details of an attack on Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis in March. The second chat group, initially reported by the New York Times, included about a dozen people. The White House is standing by its claim that no classified information has been disclosed in the group chats, but Democrats insist that Pete Hegseth must now go. The trade war saga between the world's two largest economies continues as the Trump administration pressures trading partners to isolate China in negotiations. Beijing has vowed retaliation if countries strike trade deals with the U.S. at the expense of its interests, accusing the U.S. of abusing tariffs and unilaterally bullying. This month, President Trump paused major tariff hikes on other countries for 90 days, but did raise duties on Chinese goods to 145%. And to the Middle East, Palestinian medics report that at least 6 people, including a family of 4, were killed in 2 Israeli airstrikes near Gaza's Khan Yunis. One strike hit a house east of the city, while the second targeted a tent in the Mawasi area, a camp designated by the Israeli military as a safe zone. Now, the US dollar continued its slide on Monday, hitting its lowest level since 2022. The decline comes as President Donald Trump escalates his trade war and threatens to remove Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, shaking investor confidence. The dollar's drop has driven safe haven gold to a record high. Trump launched a harsh attack on Powell on Thursday, with his team reportedly considering whether they could actually fire him.
The pandemic, if you remember, there was
For more on this, I'm joined by Al Arabiya's senior correspondent, Carina Kamel, who is in London for us. Great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So the US markets have opened lower and the dollar has fallen to a 3-year low as Trump takes aim at the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Why is this causing so much concern among investors?
Well, it's no surprise that markets are reacting in the way that they are in the United States. We've seen equities drop, and we've seen this dramatic drop in the US dollar as well, because the Federal Reserve, the US central bank, is fully independent, and the way it operates is meant to be, and has been for decades, fully independent of any political influences or political interference. In fact, the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, more than 100 years ago, for the sole purpose of averting financial panics. After a series of panics in the US economy, an act of Congress created the Federal Reserve to restore balance and calm to the markets. So if there's any question about the independence of the Federal Reserve, by consequence, obviously that will cause panic in the markets. Now, the question is it possible for President Donald Trump to actually fire Chairman Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve? The act of Congress that created the Federal Reserve says that you cannot actually fire the chairman without cause. So we're talking about corruption or some kind of other act or other sort of inappropriate behavior on his part, incompetence, for example. However, there are certain cases currently before the U.S. Supreme Court where the current administration is requesting the right to fire heads of certain independent agencies. So that's a separate issue. And Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has himself said in answer to that question a while back, would you resign if President Trump asked you to? And he said no. And he also said it's a matter of law. So essentially, the president does not have the rightful ability to fire me. And he's not necessarily going to leave before the end of his term. And it's also worth reminding viewers 2 things. This is not the first time that President Donald Trump has attacked Jerome Powell. He's done it dozens of times in his first term. And obviously, he's done it a few times. Perhaps he's ramped it up over the last few days, last week, and today again. His advisors are also joining in the criticism. But it's also worth reminding our viewers that it was President Donald Trump who hired Jerome Powell. He appointed him, he nominated him in 2017 to his first term. It's a 4-year term, which he served during Trump's first term in office from 2018 to 2022. And then President Joe Biden renewed his term from 22 to 26. So his term's actually set to end in May 2026. And the only question is, can he actually hold on till then? Could there be some kind of an intervention? And just back to your original question, the panic is no surprise, because if the linchpin, the backstop, the lender of last resort of the U.S. economy is under question, what does that mean for investor confidence in the U.S. stock market, in the U.S. dollar, in the U.S. economy in general?
So the European markets are closed for Easter Monday, but the Swiss franc has hit a decade high and the euro is also rising. I think it was $1.15 today. Why are we seeing the strength in these currencies?
You know, it's so interesting what we're watching in financial markets right now, especially in the FX or the foreign exchange markets. It's also worth reminding our viewers that despite the European equity markets being closed today, Monday, the foreign exchange market continues 24/7, so it never stops. And that's why perhaps we're seeing, in response to what's happening in the US, normally we would also see a reaction in European stock markets. But the fact that they're closed today, we're seeing the reaction or the correlation is happening in the currencies which are trading today. So we've seen a massive drop, as you said in the introduction, in the US dollar, a 3-year low against a basket of currencies. In fact, since mid-January, when President Trump came into office and was inaugurated, the dollar is actually down 9% against a basket of currencies. So when the dollar drops, that means that investors are taking their money out of the US dollar. Where's it going to go? It's going to the other safe havens that are around right now, such as the Swiss franc, such as the yen, by the way, and also the euro. And with the euro, it's really interesting. If we say the Swiss franc has always been one of those known safe havens, dollar, franc, yen, gold. That's where investors turn to in times of trouble. And then we come to the euro. Why is the euro also rising? It's not one of those traditional safe havens. But then we ask a new question, which is if the dollar is losing its primacy as the currency of global reserve, that's where investors, pension funds, institutions, central banks park their cash. If the dollar is no longer functioning as the kind of backstop of the global trading system, what is the currency that could replace it? And some are asking the question, could it be the euro? Is this the moment that the euro perhaps not replaces the dollar, but competes with the dollar to be another source where investors are going to sort of direct their investments? And so what's happening today in the euro is, as a result of the outflows we're seeing from the dollar, some of them are headed to the Swiss franc and some of them are heading to the euro. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the European Central Bank, which by the way cut interest rates on Thursday last week, which Donald Trump is wanting the Federal Reserve to do. So he's perhaps more angry that the European Central Bank cut rates, whereas the Federal Reserve has showed no indication that it's intending to cut rates, which is essentially why is Donald Trump criticizing the Fed? Back to the original question. He would like to see interest rates cut in the United States because he knows that the tariffs are going to increase prices for consumers, and he came into office on an election promise of reducing costs for consumers in the United States. So if the opposite of that happens, it's not so good for Donald Trump. But the problem for the Federal Reserve is that it has two mandates. One of them is maintaining maximum employment, and the second mandate is maintaining price stability and making sure inflation doesn't get out of control. And so if prices are rising because of tariffs, the last thing the Federal Reserve is going to do is cut interest rates. Whereas the ECB, it's completely different. They have cut interest rates because they're seeing such adverse effects on the European economy that they had to cut interest rates. And so it's interesting to see, will the ECB step up, and will we see the euro gain in popularity given this sort of shifting dynamics in the global currency markets?
Al Arabiya's senior correspondent, Kamel. Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Iran's top diplomat will visit China tomorrow. The foreign minister's visit comes ahead of a third round of nuclear talks between Tehran and Washington, which are due to take place in Oman on Saturday. South Sudan's army has said it has recaptured a key town in the Upper Nile state. It lost the area to the White Army militia in March during clashes which led to the arrest of the first vice president of South Sudan, an aspiring political crisis. Norway's Prime Minister and Finance Minister will head to Washington to meet with President Donald Trump on Thursday. The Prime Minister's office made the announcement in a statement which also said the meeting at the White House will cover the war in Ukraine as well as trade and also NATO. And Gatwick is the UK's worst airport for flight delays for the second year running. That's according to new data from the Civil Aviation Authority. After suffering from continued air traffic control disruptions, departures from the West Sussex Airport were delayed by more than 23 minutes on average in 2024. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Hundreds of global finance leaders will descend on Washington this week for the International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings. This year, rather than policy coordination on climate change, inflation, and financial support for Ukraine's struggle against Russia's invasion, one issue will dominate, and that is tariffs. Trump's tariffs are already darkening the IMF's economic forecast, which will put more pressure on developing country debt burdens. Boeing has secured new stocks of specialized nuts and bolts that hold together its top-selling commercial jet. This will help avoid any slowdown in U.S. plane production due to a fire at a key supplier's factory. Boeing's been running low on certain fasteners used to attach the landing gear on its 737 MAX jets because of that February fire. Turning to the sports news now, Liverpool have moved just one win away from sealing the English Premier League title after beating Leicester City 1-0. Trent Alexander-Arnold sealed the victory, scoring the only goal in the 76th minute. The result condemned Leicester City to relegation after just one season back in the top flight. And Oscar Piastri has won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and seized the Formula One championship lead from McLaren teammate Lando Norris with his third win in 5 races. Red Bull's Max Verstappen was runner-up after starting from pole in Jeddah, with Charles Leclerc taking Ferrari's first podium of 2025 in 3rd place. A reminder of our top stories. Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff, passed away on Easter Monday at the age of 88 after suffering from a chronic lung disease. Described as a humble leader, the world mourns his loss. Ukraine has a deadline to respond to Trump's proposal to end the war by the end of the week, a plan that experts say favors Russia. The US dollar has dropped to a 3-year low amid President Donald Trump's tariff war. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next, followed by The Real Deal. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.